And welcome back to another episode of Discernment Now. My name is Rich Van Every. I'm here with Kevin Anthony. And oh boy, what's new? There's much.
There's always a ton of new stuff. Why don't we start with the fact that the Biden administration has refused Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Secret Service protection.
Oh boy.
This is actually an unprecedented move, as any main candidate, thank you, for president always receives Secret Service protection. So this is kind of the first time that this has happened.
Okay, so this is the new low blow that even Trump wasn't granted, even though he's been perpetually attacked. Now, Robert's kind of been able to take it to the next level by...
even Trump had Secret Service protection while running as a candidate. So this gives you a very clear indication of how the Democrats feel about RFK.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much telling you that there isn't a snowball's chance in hell, as they say, that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will actually get the Democratic nomination. They won't even physically protect him, which they've done to every other main candidate ever in the history of this country.
Wow. Well, this has been one of my big problems with him running under that party. I kind of knew that was the case from the get-go, but at least he's getting his voice out there and hopefully waking some people up.
That is the positive, which we've talked about on this show already, so we don't need to go into the positives of that. But I just think, in a show that's about discernment, you have to ask yourself, why are they refusing him Secret Service protection when they've given it to every other candidate in an election before?
Yeah.
So it's an important question you have to ask. The answer to that, of course, is because they will do anything and everything they can to prevent him from ever getting anywhere near the nomination. So, in their minds, if some crazed lone gunman, which is never really the case, but if some crazed lone gunman actually took him out, then they wouldn't have to make it so obvious when it comes right down to the wire like they did with Bernie and completely cheat him out of it. But we all know they do it anyway, so it doesn't matter how much they hide it. It makes no difference.
So if you feel the learned hopelessness setting in, just take a deep breath and just know it's not over till it's over. Is that what you say, Kev?
Well, it's never over till it's over.
Okay, all right. Just as long as you know that.
RFK, the best we could get out of this situation is that he helps raise awareness by talking about a lot of the things that no other candidate will talk about.
Yeah, God bless him for that. So I just want to reiterate, too, the intention of this podcast, once again, is that we don't always have the answers, do we? We actually rarely have any answers, but we are stimulating the conversation. We are wanting to promote this concept of discernment. It's not that widely practiced, apparently, in today's world. They say that common sense is not that common. But anyhow, I pulled the definition just for fun, okay? It is the act or process of exhibiting keen insight and good judgment.
That is definitely what we're doing here.
Let us pray, and we're doing our best. You do your best. Join us in the conversation, and we'll maybe get somewhere.
Okay.
What's next?
So, Hunter Biden business associate Devon Archer finally testified. And honestly, the testimony was absolutely damning.
Wow.
I mean, it proves everything we already knew, that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were running a influence peddling scheme. We already knew that. We had the laptop, we had the emails, we had Tony Bobulinski, another business partner. There is a mountain of evidence, so this is just one more giant piece of evidence heaped on top of the pile that does prove that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, they were selling access to Joe for money. So Joe would do favors for foreign countries, and they would get paid a bunch of money. Yeah. There's, of course, a million problems with that, aside from the fact that it's blatantly illegal. And it's illegal for multiple reasons. But the big thing that you should really take away from this is that we now have proof that Joe Biden was what is called a foreign agent.
Oh, yeah.
So it is not illegal to...
You need a license for that, don't you?
Yes. It is not illegal to operate on behalf of a foreign country, but you have to register as a foreign agent under the FARA Act.
Okay.
So Of course, they did not do that.
Shame on you.
Not only that, it's completely illegal in a million other ways as far as taking money. It's basically bribery, and it's also borders on treason and a whole bunch of other things. So it's just important to mention that we have yet more evidence showing that this scheme that has been talked about in the media for years now is indeed true. Where's the discernment piece in this? Well, because the media gaslighted you and lied to you for years. I mean, you can go watch all the clips of Joe Biden saying, I do not talk to my son about his business. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of those. And then the story shifted to, well, I talked to him about it, but I don't really know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And then when they had videos and photos of Joe and audio recordings of him literally speaking to the business associates, well, yeah, I spoke to the business associates, but I only asked them, how the weather was.
Yeah.
So, it's all just nonsense.
Ridiculous.
You have to be able to see right through that.
Well, another, I think, dot to connect in a sense is that every time one of these
that's
issues
the next
come
thing
up
on the list.
Yeah, it just, wow, look what happens in conjunction with that to distract you so thoroughly and properly.
So one of the reasons, I mean, obviously that's a big story to talk about in and of itself, but one of the reasons I really wanted to mention that was because literally the day after Devon Archer testifies that Joe is the big guy, they indict Trump again for some stuff that supposedly happened on January 6th. I'm not even going to get into that indictment. It's just as horrible and flimsy as the rest of the indictments. Basically, they're trying to indict him for what is absolutely 100% free speech protected by the Constitution. That's a whole other thing. If they actually did prosecute Trump for this, they'd also have to arrest and prosecute every other person in government for doing the exact same thing.
Right.
That's a whole other story. What we really wanted to cover here was that there is a very clear pattern, and a few in fact, the Republicans put together one, but a few media people have put these together as well. They're basically like flyers or memes where they show you every time a piece of information comes out that's really damaging to Joe Biden, there's a Trump indictment followed within a day to 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Yeah.
Every Trump indictment has followed some damning piece of evidence against the Biden. So you have to, again, use your discernment and realize that, these things are being done as distractions. Now, they didn't indict Trump just to distract against that. Believe me, they wanted to indict Trump for sure.
Yeah.
But they sit on these indictments. They wait for something in the news cycle to come out, right? And they go,
now's a good time.
Crap, we need a distraction. Okay, release the indictment that's already been written for the last 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Because we knew they were going to indict him. We've been sitting here waiting for this. Why? And if it only happened
there'd be
once,
so many, though. There's just been a plethora. And, and this is part of the playbook of the Art of War, I believe, is it not? You accuse your opposition of the very thing that you're doing. Is that part of the Art of War?
Well, it's not part of the Art of War.
It's just a tactic, right? It's a good tactic to gaslight everybody.
I believe it actually comes from Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals.
Okay, that's probably it.
Which is to accuse the enemy of the exact thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
A fascinating book, by the way, that you really should read, because if you want to understand how they think and how they use these tactics against you, you need to know what the tactics are.
Right.
So there's a bunch of them in there that are really interesting. Okay. A couple other things that are really important to talk about. One is there was a new report that came out recently that shows that the ESG regulations actually increase carbon emissions.
Yeah.
So, ESG stands for environmental social governance. It's one of the World Economic Forum's big pushes where they're forcing these environmental social governance rules onto countries and to companies, trying to force them to comply with this. Now, they're doing this under the guise of Global warming.
Climate change.
We've got to make sure that everybody follows these ESG guidelines so that we can reduce emissions
Right.
and therefore reduce the global warming and solve the climate change crisis. That's what they're telling you.
And depopulate in the process.
Well, that's a whole other thing. But this new report actually studied the companies who are following these and was tracking their emissions and found out that best case scenario, the ESG regulations have zero impact on a company's carbon emissions.
Yeah.
But in many cases, it actually caused the company to increase their carbon emissions.
That's classic.
Now, of course, we know this has nothing to do with carbon emissions.
No.
So a lot of people might be going, "Oh my God, this is terrible. They better come up with a new plan. They somehow got it wrong." No, they didn't get it wrong at all. It's working exactly the way they wanted it to work.
Yeah.
This has absolutely nothing to do with reducing carbon emissions. If it did, it would actually work.
Right. It's more focused on demoralizing and consolidating wealth and power, ultimately, I'd say.
Well, it's all part of the globalist agenda to take control of everything, ultimately.
Right.
So, but, we need to point these things out whenever we can, because when they're sitting there telling you that this ESG stuff is so important and everybody must comply, you can call bullshit on that and say, no, not only is this insane, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Like, you can actually speak logically to people who think that maybe we should do more for the environment and the planet, which is justified. I think we have a pollution problem, no doubt. But this
Right.
is...
Well, that's a whole other subject.
This is a deceptive mechanism that needs to be exposed for what it is. Same thing with the social credit system and any kind of global currency. So...
Yeah.
All right. Well, I have something I'd like to talk about.
Okay.
There's this leprosy hype coming out now, along with malaria spreading apparently in Texas and in Florida. I'm not quite sure if the mosquitoes are to blame that have been genetically modified by Granny Gates, as our friend calls him. But I just wanted to bring a little attention to this because it seems to be absolutely just ridiculous and unfounded and fabricated out of almost literally nothing. Not to say that there isn't a slight increase in cases, and we're not quite exactly sure how and why it's happening, but the migrants coming up from south of the border have been suspected as possibly being a cause in which the numbers have increased. But it's just something I wanted to point out because it is, in a sense, just being used as another mechanism of fear to push future medications and whatnot.
Yeah, my initial thought on that is it's probably largely hype.
Yeah.
And being used to scare you.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no doubt that they're going to try another pandemic.
Yeah.
I just read another article that did not make the list of things to talk about today about how they're already preparing vaccines for the next pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you might want to ask, how can you prepare vaccines for a pandemic that hasn't happened yet? And you'd be right in asking that question. Apparently, there's a list of potential viruses that
bird flu, smallpox.
Well, avian was one,
Marburg,
smallpox. Yeah, there's a bunch of them that they believe might be the next pandemic. Make no mistake about it. If there is a pandemic on any of those, it's because they created it. It reminds me of that movie Friday.
Oh, wow.
You ever see the movie Friday with Ice Cube and Chris Tucker?
Yeah.
And these guys go in and they rob the house next door in the neighborhood. And then they come over the next day and they go, "Oh man, I heard your house got robbed." And what does the guy say to him? "Shut the F up. You didn't hear anything because you was busy doing." Right? So when they come in and say, "Oh my God, there's a pandemic." Yeah, you know there's a pandemic because you created it. So make no mistake, they are getting ready to unleash another one. So keep your eyes open for that. Now the question is, will it be a real one or will it be another fake one like we had before?
Right.
We don't really know, but
prepare for it all. Yeah. Okay, what's next, Kev?
All right, so another interesting thing that happened recently is the U.S. credit rating got downgraded yet again. We used to be, I think it was AAA plus, then we got down to AAA, now we are down to AA plus.
Oh,
this is
still
absolutely
sounds good, but...
huge and has massive implications for the economy.
Oh, wow.
What this basically means is that everything's going to cost more because the way the U.S. government funds itself is by selling its credit,
treasuries and bonds,
right,
and that sort of thing,
to investors in other countries. When your credit rating goes down, that means that you are higher risk, which means nobody will actually buy any of this stuff unless you offer them a much higher interest rate, which means the federal government's going to have to spend a lot more money in order to get money, get people to invest in the U.S. So this is a big, big problem. Just shortly before coming on the air here, I did see another article also that some of the major ratings agencies have also just downgraded several big banks as well. So these are really big problems that are happening. And keep in mind that the original not the original, but this most recent downgrading of the United States credit rating also happened at the exact same time the Trump indictment was announced. So again, here's the discernment. Why did they decide to announce the downgrade at that exact moment? All of this stuff is timed. It's timed to distract you and timed to make it so that the majority of people don't hear about these things.
Right.
How many people watching this were aware? Well, maybe the people watching this are aware, but how many regular people do you think are aware that the U.S. just got downgraded yet again?
Yeah.
But how many of you are aware that Trump got indicted? Right. Oh, I'm sure every single one of you are.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Money matters, people. And again, I think with this story, it's important to mention that there's almost always more than 2 or 3 agendas with each fabricated crisis, per se, or issue.
Exactly.
So, obviously the global currency thing, this is, devaluing and weakening the dollar, making it look like we need a reason to have something come in and save the day, could be a part of this one. Yet overall, me personally, I encourage people to use cash and fight to keep our currency alive and well as long as possible. So yes. Thanks for sharing that one.
Okay, now I got a bunch of interesting stories on the jabs.
Pokey poke. Don't do it.
Yeah, so the first one is a new study that came out showing that there are actually 3 groups when it comes to the batches of vaccinations. And so what they did was they looked at the adverse event reports. And in those, there is a batch number of what batch of vaccine did the individual get. And so they took all of those and they created, they fell into basically 3 groups. The first group is a group that had a high percentage of adverse reactions. The second group is a group that had a medium amount of adverse reactions. And here's the interesting thing. The third group had 0 adverse reactions. So why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting because it's statistically impossible for a group to have 0 adverse reactions. Every jab of any kind, regardless of what it's for, always has adverse reactions. So if certain batch numbers had 0 adverse reactions, then we know that they couldn't possibly have contained any actual juice, right? Now, there's a couple big implications to that, right? So the first one is talking about discernment. One of the things that we were saying way back when the jabs first came out was they hadn't done any testing. And so this deployment to the general population is the test. But you can't have a test without a placebo group. So we were theorizing that one of the reasons why some people had no ill effects at all was because some people were getting just plain saline.
Yeah, which is salt water.
So that was our theory.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have a study of the actual data that
Right.
seems to corroborate that by saying,
Yeah.
hey, here's a group of batch numbers,
Mm-hmm.
right, that have 0 adverse reactions.
Right.
It also shows too that because it wasn't just some had 0 and then the rest had about the same. It broke down into 3 groups, which
Yeah.
means they put more of the juice in some than in others.
Yeah.
So they tested on the live population. That's the first thing that you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
The theories that were being proposed several years ago on this turned out to be correct. But here's another implication. Many of you made this decision to get the jab because you wanted to be protected.
Mm-hmm.
And what they gave you was just saline, which means they lied to you and they potentially jeopardized your life because you thought you were protected and you weren't. Now, of course,
but you got lucky in the end.
In the end, you got lucky, of course,
Yeah.
because as we know, and we're going to talk about this in the next story as well. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I would like to add to that. I mean, I feel that this is such a fascinating thing because, I've been really tuning into some incredible researchers from overseas that are looking at blood under dark field microscopy, and not only the people that have subjected themselves to the gene therapy, I like to call it, but we can reference it as a vaccine given they changed the definition of vaccine in order to encompass more
Right.
than what we used to refer it to. But Dr. Anna Maria Mihaicha, and Dr. David Nixon are both finding some incredible nanotechnology in the blood of even unvaccinated people. So that's suspected that it's getting rained down on us from above and perhaps implemented into our food and water systems. But this is one of the things that has me go, great, we need to focus on these injections, but there's other things that are making us toxic and that we have to also address and can be concerned about.
Interesting that you bring that up. I did not put this on the list to talk about, but why don't we cover it really quick anyway, which is another new study that just came out showing that vaccinated parents were actually contaminating the blood of their unvaccinated children, and they believe it's through skin and respiratory.
Yeah.
So what they did was they took a bunch of masks from people who were vaccinated and they analyzed what was on the mask. And then they looked at the unvaccinated to see if those showed up.
Yeah.
And basically what the study showed was that the antigens created from the vax, which should not be in people who are unvaxxed, were showing up. Like if the parents in the home were vaccinated and the kids weren't, the kids were showing up with the antigens in their bloodstream that the parents had. So
especially if they're breastfeeding and whatnot. I mean,
that's a whole other thing. This study only
just shedding, and so the
only
shedding,
looked at airborne and touch, right?
Yeah.
So skin to skin contact and breathing basically is what this study looked at. So this is another thing that has been talked about for several years now about the possibility of shedding. So the next logical question that some people are asking is, well, if the antigens can be passed, what about the spike proteins? We don't know the answer to that yet, but it seems to be highly possible.
Yeah.
Now, I would say that you're still better off not having had the jab because your body isn't producing it constantly and creating that inflammatory response that we know happens if you have been jabbed. So you're still better off, but it would also mean you would want to limit contact with those who have been jabbed, which is tricky because it's basically impossible to do that, especially if you have family members, loved ones, whatever. That's just not happening. So that is extremely concerning, and who knows, it could be coming from other places as well. But so far, that's what that study showed. Which leads me to the last jab-related thing that I wanted to talk about, which is there's another new study that shows that the more jabs, the worse the mortality outcome. So I got to read this to you so that I get it right and that you hear it correctly. A peer-reviewed study published in 2011 using 2009 data demonstrated that among the most highly developed nations, those requiring the most vaccine doses for their infants tended to have the least favorable infant mortality rates. So, the more vaccines you gave to infants, the higher the mortality rate, meaning the more children died. Now, keep in mind that has nothing to do with COVID jabs, right? Well, earlier this year, that study was replicated using 2019 data. So, still showing a robust negative correlation with doses. So a second follow-up analysis also included mortality data on neonates and children under 5. Using data sets from 2019 and 2021, all three categories, neonates, infants, and under 5s, have higher mortality rates the more doses they're given.
Wow.
Something we have talked about, not we necessarily on this show, but many people have talked about for years about the increasing number on the schedule and the potentially harmful impacts of that. Now we have a study that actually shows that. But wait, there's more.
Oh my.
Other studies have shown that the timing of the administration can impact the mortality risk. The gender of your child can also make him or her susceptible to injury and death, and the sequence in which they receive the jabs can heighten or lessen the risk of death.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors in there. Now we also have a German study which compared outcomes between people who got the COVID jab and those who didn't. During 2021, symptomatic COVID-19 complaints were more frequent among the unjabbed, but during 2022, the ratios of COVID infection in the two groups narrowed until, finally, the jabbed group was 18% more likely to get COVID, and the COVID infections experienced by the jabbed group were more severe. The rate of severe persistent symptoms of COVID was also 2.5 times higher among the jabbed. The jabbed reported being diagnosed with new chronic health problems at a rate 2.5 times higher than the unjabbed, and menstrual problems among women are 4 times more frequent in the jabbed group than the unjabbed
That's
group.
400%, just in case you need a little side note.
Right.
And honestly, I mean, turbo cancer, okay, sudden death syndrome, these things have not been seen until the last couple of years. So
Obviously,
it's not necessarily just correlated to that,
right.
but
we're going to need more research to figure out. But that's what has changed in the last couple of years dramatically.
Right.
Well, the fact that was rolled out to so many people. So,
well, that was amazing, Kevin. Thank you for the disturbing update on all that, and I hope everybody will continue to get educated and research what they can, and not trust anybody without using their own health advocate knowingness and possibly even acquiring your own health advocate.
Well, do your own research. Do not trust what somebody tells you just because they're in the government or wearing a white lab coat.
Yeah.
Right.
Use your intuition.
And, I would say do not let them manipulate you with fear.
Yeah.
Slow down, take the time to research it, and make an educated decision for yourself.
Okay. Well, in closing, I'd like to touch back on this most important theatrical release that Kevin and I both got to go see. We had already given it a double thumbs up before we even went to see it, because we just know the subject matter is an important one, and that is The Sound of Freedom. So, Kev, what was your experience? What would you say about the film with your critical, discerning perspective?
Why, thank you. Well, my take on it is this. I thought it was a great film, and as expected, the overwhelming majority of stuff the media said about it simply wasn't true. So there were so many media headlines. Rolling Stone did a headline that said that the Sound of Freedom movie was for QAnon dads with brainworms, right? Mm-hmm. Basically saying stupid people, right?
Yeah.
And there were many, many others. That's just one. It was kind of one of the funniest ones that I had seen.
Like a desperate jab there.
So, basically they did everything they could to trash the movie and equate it with QAnon and all this other stuff. keep in mind, there is no such thing as QAnon. It doesn't exist. It's just a label that they give anytime they want to discredit something. There was no mention of QAnons, QAnon, no even mention of government conspiracy or anything in any conspiracy in any way. This is just straight up, here's what's happening. And then the majority of the movie follows one raid that actually did happen, and they showed pictures at the end of the actual raids, and so you could see how it compares.
It was really
to
well done. I thought it was tastefully well done, and the acting was excellent.
It's a good movie, and it really does help raise awareness. And I know there's tons of criticism about it, and this guy who funded it was this guy, and all of that aside, I cannot find thus far any real way or reason that this film being out there benefits the deep state, the pedos, or anything like that. Because it just doesn't make any sense as far as we're going to use this as a psyop.
Right.
I know lots of people are saying it's a psyop. I haven't found a plausible angle on how this actually helps their cause.
No, awareness is the first step in dealing with any issue, and this has been one of the issues hiding under the rug for many people for a very long time.
Right, and
this is like the oldest form of slavery that is underground and has been for all of humanity, and now it's actually coming out in a way that like never before.
Right, and because of that, that's why really I can only see this movie being positive in the fact that it's raising awareness.
Yeah. So all right, well, thank you for that, Kevin. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your week. Stay free, stay healthy, and practice your discernment. Take care.